All right. Thank you, Lara, for the intro. I feel a little bit like Iron Butterfly when Led Zeppelin opened for them. Um, the, Hopefully, my Inagata Devita will be in top form today. Um, I'm going to start with a piece called Brewery Creek, which is roughly where we live in uh, Mount Pleasant part of Vancouver, around Main and 16th. It was once a bottomland, a wetland, this whole area here, that was a Labrador tea swamp, hence the name, the tea swamp. Tea swamp park's just uh, that way, a block away from us. And it's not far from where we used to live in a rented house. And every time we got the winter rains, the basement would start flooding. So we would get the kids together and get the neighbors' kids, and everybody would do a bucket brigade, and we would swamp out the basement, out the back door, to prevent my tools from getting wet. It was good fun. We all put on the gum boots and stuff like that. And eventually I built sort of a platform to put my stuff in. But yeah, every winter we'd have to get the water out of the basement. And it wasn't because the drainage around the house wasn't working. It was just because it was almost afloat. Uh, Brewery Creek. This house almost floats on buried water, a cradle for a creek struggling to be reborn, relearning the forgotten trackways to the sea, seeping through the pores of old concrete, pooling in the backyard, and taking the measure of an alien century. This rented house with spavined ridgeline, molting shingles, its floors off level, and a river beneath us, forcing through cracks to collect in rivulets in the low corner of the basement. Buried water, riding the bones of ancient ravines. Does it remember the mud flats, the silent tidewater of another time? All this moving water, too obviously a metaphor, I think, for the hidden currents in families, the subterranean mystery flowing beneath our lives. Then how fitting this house with its discount shade of yellow, slapped up with a minimum of second-rate lumber in a vague approximation of square. How fitting that this house that shakes and bounces with the rhythms of children pushing into a new century with sway-backed gable and spongy veranda. How fitting that this house, which draws laughter from us so easily and cups it within its battered walls, should have such a stream beneath it, improbable, inconvenient, persistent, asserting itself and pushing upward into the daylight. So the Fraser River, where I've often worked, uh, is tidal where we live. It actually will run backwards when the tide is coming in. This is a very short little poem called High Slack. Um, High slack tide stills the river, suspends time, holds even the air in abeyance. The bottle brush trees gray on the island, imbricated drift logs in the sedge, blue heron motionless on a piling above a brown slab of water, and all smells of rain past and rain promised. This next one came out of just a typical day at work. I drive boats in Vancouver Harbor. It's called Early One Morning, Whales off Centerm. Centerm is a big container dock. The longer fins of the adults protectively on either side of the young, their backs and fins rolling up like slow wheels, they toured Vancouver Harbor before the city awoke, chose their course along the straight slab of the container dock amid every kind of encroachment onto the contours of their world. A ship docking tug reports them to traffic, stills its engines in reverent pause. I take my boat out of gear and drift. There is a silence on the radio that weighs the same as the sensation that 4 whales in the harbor should be remarkable, weighs the same as the discomfort of knowing their children are seeing what we have done. I've forgotten my phone. I can only witness them with my eyes. So Queensborough is part of New Westminster on the eastern tip of Lulu Island. It used to be the poor industrial part of New West. It's rapidly being completely redeveloped as, well, what we always redevelop into, quite expensive housing and shopping. Uh, this is called the Queensborough Hotel. Let's remember the beer parlor of the Queensborough Hotel in its last days. It's an uncomfortable picture of an uncomfortable room, not at all at ease with its emptiness. This vast drinking hall for sawmill workers, shipyard welders, a place to cash your paycheck and to spend it, a gravel parking lot out back for fights, rows of armchairs, elbow to elbow. 200 men would arrive 10 minutes after the shift whistle once upon a time. Some would stay for an hour, riotous under a thick cloud of smoke, and then head home to the wife, kids, dinner, hockey in black and white on the CBC. Others would stay till closing, navigate a car to some place of solace, and park their fists, perhaps, on the face of someone who could not hit back. Their distempered ghosts are still here glaring at you from rows of empty chairs at empty tables. You can smell their spent hopes in the stale beer in the carpeting. Ceiling tiles 15 years after smoking was outlawed are still yellowed with a crust of tobacco. The click of pool balls in the corner is the loudest sound, and 3 or 4 afternoon drinkers in the sloping light of high narrow windows bend together in a still life. So in Powell River, there is a Powell Lake is up behind Powell River. It wasn't originally a river, it was just a narrow inlet to a big inlet in behind. And on that inlet is an island called Goat Island. And at the top of Goat Island was Frog Pond Lake. I went there with some friends of mine once. We were tree planters. And well, I'll just read the poem. True story. Not yet drunk, but with clear intent, the four of us, Morstead, Johnny, me, and the Silverback, climbed this muddy trail, nearly vertical in the island's side. Our backs are burdened with flats of beer, smokes and bacon, chew tobacco, coffee, butter, and the vanity of youth. Tonight we will slay the trout of Frog Pond Lake, unload a 308 across a platter of moonlight, and with God's mercy on fools, nobody will get shot. Far below is the borrowed boat and sagging float of logs and plank, close enough to spit on from 200 feet up, and the green riot of second growth wrapping close overhead parcels out a stingy glimpse of sky. Sometimes a break in the serried ranks of scaly trunks utters a stretch of lake, beaten pewter to draw the eye to horizontal when all else is up or down. We climb hills for a living, the Silverback and I, other hills than these, ours being habitually bereft of trees, lugging saddlebags of dirt and seedlings over logs and stumps, and formerly Morstead and Johnny too, until they quit inexplicably, leaving tree planting and also a disquiet in their wake, a subtle angst that Silverback and I do not quite mention, as if it were past time for us as well. Morstad's brought his camera. It's the tool of his new profession, and damn straight we'll do our best to get him fired from an underpaid internship in the Powell River Weekly. We want him back with us, planting trees from February to October, threading through Slash and Salal on the coast, highballing over the dust of the burn in the interior. Then we'll make some real money with our honest sweat and play euchre of an evening in smoke-filled motel rooms full of empties in town's first named port. Age difficulties here. That was your intermission. But for today, there is a cabin Morstead knows far above, and prospectors on a sword fern trail we climb. The hill pauses, and so do we. The only sounds are the creaking of the trees on an ice age bench, the land shelving abruptly like a deep breath. You can see the moss-hung planks, delicate with rot, the last of the shake blockers flume. It lifted up the stream to carry cedar down and throw it from the shoulder of the mountain. Morstad points to a soft depression. Look close, and the glint of old glass bottles and tiny bits of porcelain poke out above the fuzzy green. Chinese camp from the 30s, he says. Filaments of rusty metal among the fiddleheads, a scrap of rotten wood pokes from underneath a sword fern, and a story unfolds itself. The company dammed the inlet's mouth to drive the mill, stopped the ancient breath of tides, and made of the frog pond a lake within a lake. Side hill fir and hemlock then pulled down, but no need for cedar in a pulp mill town, so still it stood when the shake cutters, men of lesser place, and hence unwelcome in the bars where loggers drank, with froze and handsaws, and the sole comfort of their secret dreams, played the gut fiddle, the 70 steel teeth of the misery whip. And handsaws then made logs of trees that shared birthdays with the Frankish kings, proceeded and outlived the Mings. Gut fiddle sent the shake bolts down the hill in a glide of water to the shingle mill. Gut fiddle broke their backs for so little it hurts to think about it. It hurts your soul just to admit it. No going forward, no return for these prisoners of distance and of poverty, trapped in an alien land with nothing but a bit of breakfast, an evening meal, and a debt one life cannot pay down. And here are four white boys standing in the guilty shadow of stumps as big as smallish houses, looking up at the buckboard notches, who thought ourselves, until this last rise, working men. The poet and artist William Blake gives Isaac Newton a rough ride. There's a famous engraving showing a naked and improbably muscular young Apollonian Isaac Newton circumscribing the world. Blake felt that the reductionist view of the world that he saw, that he attributed to Newton, was severing humanity from a sort of a holistic conception of nature. It was cutting us off from wonder, spiritual wholeness, when in reality it was just capitalism doing that. So I mentioned Newton in the following poem in a similar context, but I'm not dissing him. I think he was one of the smartest people ever lived. He came up with equations back in the 1670s that we're using today to position the James Webb Space Telescope in its Lagrange point in orbit around the sun. He figured out how gravity works completely, and he left it to Einstein to tell us what gravity is, an actual integral property of space-time. So originally I called this poem The Whole Enchilada, but I figured it'd be more accurate to call it Quantum Foam. Anyways, I'll just read it now. The preamble's longer than the poem. The intermittent reinforcement of a miracle could be what makes prayer so addictive. Heaven's polite golf clap when your scratch and win gets you $10 on your birthday. But long before Newton apprehended the universe, there were those who held old observations that all things are interconnected. Each link of action recites a pattern in the branches of trees against the slate of an autumn sky, and the mandala of a thistle blooming improbably in the poisoned gravel of an abandoned gas station is singing the future in the bloodstream of the past. The path of our choices, the unknown mathematics of leaf and blossom, were written in full before any one thing ever moved or was. And on that note, this one's called Flotsam and Jetsam. Flotsam being stuff floating around in the water, jetsam being the stuff you jettison, the garbage floating around in the water. A scrap of copper on a beach, a jade-colored flake no bigger than your fingernail, uttered by this wide expanse of sand, and differs in kind from the beer caps, glass, crow-pecked wrappers, six-pack loops among the bladder rack, soon to adorn the neck of a dead heron, the market industrial rubbish, the scurf of cast-off energy of human endeavor that slowly filled the world ever since some Australopithecine first bashed two rocks together to make an edge and wired to disregard non-threat, non-edible, then walked from the riverbed to the carcass, leaving the instantly forgotten shards lying bright among the water-rounded boulders. And so perhaps just this casually, everything changed. I'm a man equally impressed by things old and things nautical, and wired to recognize both in a fleck of metal, greened by many years of seawater, and lying in warm beach idleness. I want to spin tales to myself of its many pasts, brought from Quatsino and carried along the coast from potlatch to potlatch for generations, or torn from the bottom planks of a dying ship, as oak, however thick, must yield to rock. But in reality, no object left on the anonymity of sand can bear its tale forward to its stranger. I can't know this story any more than I can know the forest path that once was my street. The Romans pulled limestone from the pyramids, and the bricks of Harappan cities ballasted English railroads. Someday people will mine the concrete of our strip malls for the rusting iron hiding within. And the mystery of the lives and labor that wrought these things, a corroded bit of metal, a chip of stone, or a crumbling monolith, will remain wrapped within itself, a sign, nothing more, that we once were here. The Return of the Chief. So this one's about an old boat and the old man who owned that boat. The Chief Scugade was a wooden fish packer built in 1912. And I became friends with the chap who owned it. He irritated a lot of people in New Westminster, let's just say that. And this is what that poem is about. Chief Scugade, it's not hard to say. She turned into the river in the spring of the last year of her first century, following a track well known to her, and shouldered her battered prow into the rot-soft pilings, rubbed a tang of creosote into our nostrils all summer with disconsolate restlessness at the turn of each tide. Her holds built for halibut and which later held salmon disgorged a cargo of madness, unfinished paintings, obsolete power tools, tubs full of moldering books, kept for some purpose evidently vital to their owner, and the decks piled with stove-in canoes and the butchered carcass of somebody's sailboat, chainsawed in a home-built divorce settlement and rescued from an alley. It's not the lack of seamanship in the overburdened topsides, nor the barking of his dogs that disturb the sensibilities of a seaport city desperately trying to forget the sweat and dirt and squalor of its past. Not the crumbling ladder to the forecastle, nor the rusting cans of paint stacked thereon, but the challenge presented, choices made in value and disregard. The townsfolk stalking the boardwalk darken their expressions, grimace in distaste as their mouths silently try the alien syllables of some long forgotten Haida noble painted on her bow. And that's it.